Lightning slashed across the storm-drenched Houston sky as Marcus Reynolds stepped out of his private jet, the wind tugging at his crisp navy suit. The jet bridge trembled beneath his polished shoes, rain hammering the windows like nature itself was trying to speak. In one hand, he held a glowing tablet displaying his digital boarding pass. Seat 1A, first class, Apex Airlines Flight 237. In the other, the kind of calm only a man used to boardrooms and billion-dollar mergers could carry. But calm didn't last long. "Economy's that way," snapped a voice laced with smugness. Marcus turned, eyebrows raised. A blonde woman in a snug Navy uniform stood in his path, arms crossed, Apex Airlines badge clipped neatly to her chest. Karen Holt. Her ponytail swayed like a judge's gavel, her smirk already sealing a verdict she hadn't been asked to give. Without warning, she snatched the tablet from his hand and glared at the screen. "This pass is fake," she announced, her voice pitched high enough for a few nearby passengers to glance over. "First class is for real customers." Marcus didn't flinch. "I am a real customer," he said coolly. But she wasn't listening. Karen grabbed him by the arm, not roughly but firmly enough to make a point, and turned him back toward the terminal like a misbehaving child. Thunder cracked again outside, as if echoing the injustice. As they walked down the narrow jet bridge, Marcus adjusted his tie with quiet restraint. He'd been here before, dismissed, disrespected, misjudged, but never on his own plane. Not after building Apex from the ground up. Not after fighting tooth and nail to turn it into one of the most respected boutique airlines in the U.S. A small crowd gathered near the boarding gate as Karen dragged him out. Their stares varied, curiosity, discomfort, and, from a few, the kind of silent judgment Marcus had seen since his earliest days in Atlanta. The weight of assumption was familiar, but this time, they weren't just judging a black man in a suit. They were judging their own airline's owner. And Karen? She was about to learn exactly who she had just shoved off her throne. Karen positioned herself like a gatekeeper in front of the boarding counter, her voice sharp and theatrical. "This guy thinks he's slick with a photoshopped first-class pass," she told the gate agent, waving Marcus's tablet like evidence in a trial. "I need him off this flight until we verify everything." Marcus said nothing. He slid his phone from his inner pocket, his thumb moving with the kind of precision that didn't belong to someone faking anything. Within seconds, the same digital boarding pass lit up his screen. Seat 1A, his name in bold beneath the Apex Airlines logo. "I built this airline," he said calmly, holding the screen up for both Karen and the agent to see. "I don't need to fake a seat on my own flight." The gate agent, a younger woman with wide eyes and fingers frozen above her keyboard, glanced between the tablet, the phone, and Karen. But Karen doubled down, shaking her head. "Anyone can mock up a screenshot. I'm calling security." A beat of silence passed. Then her radio crackled as she called in her version of events. A non-compliant, aggressive passenger trying to con his way into first class. The static barely faded before the gate area filled with the heavy footsteps of two security officers, one bulky and buzz-cut, the other wiry and alert. "What's going on here?" the larger one asked, eyes narrowing on Marcus. Karen didn't hesitate. "He's got a fake pass. Tried to push past me to board first class." Before Marcus could respond, the officers flanked him. He held his ground, offering the phone to the wiry one, who quickly scanned the digital pass with a handheld device. The scanner beeped, and Marcus's name and first-class seat popped up in glowing confirmation. But Karen didn't back off. "He could have hacked it. That doesn't prove anything." And with that, the larger officer grabbed Marcus's arm and began escorting him away from the jet bridge. Around them, the terminal crowd murmured, phones lifted to film. Marcus didn't resist. Not yet. His voice was calm, steady, as he made a call. "They've started it," he said quietly into the phone. "Move forward." Because what Karen and security didn't realize yet was that this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was war. The rain was still coming down hard as Marcus stood silently between the two security officers. Thunder rumbled through the glass walls of the Houston terminal, but it was nothing compared to the storm churning behind his eyes. They didn't know who he was. Not really. To them, he was just another black man who didn't belong where he said he did. Just another incident to remove before boarding resumed. The officer with the buzz cut, Tanner, gripped his arm with the kind of practice force that left bruises but not lawsuits. The wiry one, Jenkins, watched carefully but said nothing. "You need to step aside until we sort this out," Tanner muttered, his tone somewhere between command and warning. Marcus didn't argue, not yet. The gate agent looked rattled. A few passengers were still filming, others whispering to one another as he was walked back toward the seating area like a criminal. But Marcus carried himself with the poise of someone who had nothing to prove, only something to unleash. Karen strutted just ahead, her heels clicking against the tile floor like a countdown clock. She threw a smug glance back at Marcus, her smirk practically glowing. "You think you can pull a fast one?" she called over her shoulder, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not on my watch." Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. As they reached the gate's main lounge, he caught sight of a few Apex employees watching from behind the desk, frozen in place. One of them, a young woman with a nervous expression, half stood as if to say something, then sat back down quickly. That was when Marcus slipped his phone back out and made the call that would turn everything. "They've escalated it," he said softly into the receiver. "Time to move. Make sure the system is watching." On the other end, Lena Carter's voice was crisp and immediate. "Understood. It's already moving." By the time Tanner shoved Marcus gently against a support pillar and told him to stay put, the wheels were already in motion. Not just in Apex headquarters, but across the internet. Because this was no longer just about one man's boarding pass. This was about what happened when the system pushed the wrong man one step too far. Marcus stood tall, arms folded, while security hovered nearby. His breathing was controlled, but his eyes never left Karen as she returned to the jet bridge, practically glowing with satisfaction. She thought she'd won, that she'd exposed a fraud, that she'd reminded him of his place. But the truth was, she'd just exposed herself. Inside Apex's downtown Dallas headquarters, Lena Carter was already spinning up the next phase. As Apex's chief operating officer and Marcus's most trusted partner, she knew what was coming. She'd seen it before. Subtle bias turned violent, accountability dodged under the weight of a polished uniform, and plausible deniability. Not this time. Lena's fingers flew across her keyboard, flagging Marcus's VIP profile inside the airline's internal system and triggering an alert chain that would ripple from HR to the C-suite. She pinged the PR team. Legal, internal affairs. Marcus Reynolds detained by Apex staff despite ID confirmation, she wrote in the subject line. Footage was already uploading. Meanwhile, back at the gate, the air was shifting. Several passengers had caught on that something wasn't right. Whispers spread fast. "Wait, that guy looked like the one in Forbes. He owns Apex, right? Why would he fake a ticket to his own airline?" A man in a business suit stepped away from his phone and asked the gate agent quietly, "Are you sure that's not Marcus Reynolds?" "The Marcus Reynolds?" The agent faltered, then typed something into her terminal. Her eyes widened. Inside the jet bridge, Karen's radio crackled. She answered it, tone still dripping with confidence, until the voice on the other end stiffened her spine. "Karen Holt, please return to the gate immediately. There's been a VIP flag. Your presence is requested by Security Command." She froze. As she turned back toward the terminal, the buzz of confusion grew into tension. Tanner and Jenkins exchanged looks. Marcus raised one eyebrow, then smiled. Not wide, not smug. Just enough. Karen came back down the bridge slower now, less sure. Her smirk faded under the fluorescent lights. "And Marcus?" He straightened his jacket, eyes locked on her. The cabin door of Apex Flight 237 hissed shut behind Marcus, but the tension inside the plane didn't go anywhere. It clung to the air, heavy and electric, like a storm trapped in a metal cage. Marcus walked the aisle toward his first-class seat, 1A, escorted now by the same security guards who had just manhandled him at the gate. Tanner's jaw was tight, and Jenkins wouldn't meet his eyes. Karen trailed behind, quiet but fuming, her smirk gone. For now. Passengers glanced up from their phones, their eyes tracking Marcus like he was a story already going viral. Some whispered, others just stared. They all knew something had happened, but not what. Not yet. Marcus settled into his seat with the same precision he brought to every boardroom. His suit jacket brushed against the armrest, still wrinkled from being shoved, but he smoothed it with quiet defiance. The plane hummed as it began to taxi. Outside, the storm hadn't let up, but Marcus felt a colder one brewing inside. From behind the galley curtain, Karen reappeared. Her face was composed, but her hands were clenched too tight around the service tablet. She marched to his seat, leaned in low, and whispered through clenched teeth, "You think this is over because they let you back on? It's not. You don't scare me." Marcus looked at her, calm and unbothered. "I don't need to scare you. I just need you to keep talking." Her eyes flickered for a moment, hesitation, maybe fear, but then she spun on her heel and stormed off, disappearing behind the curtain again. Marcus didn't relax. He knew her type. Pride didn't back down. It doubled down. Whatever she was planning next, it wouldn't be small. As the plane began to rise through the storm clouds, he pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to Lena. "They let me on, but she's not done. Phase 2. The response came almost instantly. "We're ready. Just say when." Marcus put his phone away, his posture steady even as the turbulence shook the cabin. He didn't know what Karen would try next, but he'd learned long ago, when people like her lost control, they'd rather burn the whole plane down than admit they were wrong. The seatbelt sign dinged off, but Marcus stayed still. He could feel the shift in the cabin energy. Something was off. Too quiet, too controlled. Karen hadn't reappeared, and that wasn't like her. She was the kind to gloat in daylight, not retreat behind curtains. A few rows behind, a teenage girl in 4A, slim, hoodie pulled up, earbuds dangling, eyed Marcus curiously. She'd seen what happened at the gate. She hadn't filmed it, not yet, but she kept her phone close now, thumb hovering over the camera icon. Then came the knock. 2 crew members emerged from the galley. Not Karen. One was a tall, lanky flight attendant with a nervous blink, and the other was a broad-shouldered woman holding a clipboard like it was a shield. They stopped at Marcus's row, their faces tight, avoiding direct eye contact. "Sir," the woman said flatly, "we're going to need you to come with us. Captain's orders." Marcus looked at them, calm but curious. "And what exactly does the captain think I've done?" The tall one shifted his weight awkwardly. "Just, please, sir, we need to speak with you in private." Marcus stood slowly, towering over them even with his bruised pride. "Lead the way," he said coolly, already knowing this wasn't about protocol. It was about control, and Karen's fingerprints were all over it. They guided him past first class, through the galley, to a narrow storage closet barely 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. Bleach and coffee hung in the air. The metal latch clicked shut behind him before he could say a word. "You're staying here until we land," the woman said, her tone hard now. "Captain says you're a safety risk." And then they left him, alone, in the dark. Marcus leaned against the wall, his breathing even, despite the adrenaline burning under his skin. He stared at the ceiling, at the crack in the light fixture, and whispered to himself, "So this is how far she's willing to go." He reached for his phone. 1 bar. "Enough," he typed. "They've locked me up. Push the next move. Now!" Because if Karen thought she'd buried him in a closet, she had no idea the storm she just locked herself in with. The storage closet on Apex Flight 237 was barely big enough for a mop bucket, let alone a man of Marcus Reynolds' stature. The metal walls seemed to breathe with the plane's engine hum, the air stale and tinged with ammonia. He stood still, jaw clenched, back pressed against the wall, phone in hand, signal weak but alive. Lena's reply came fast. "It's live." They're watching. Across the plane, a ripple had started. Zariah, the teenage girl in 4A, had finally hit record. She'd seen enough. Karen's fake professionalism, Marcus being escorted out of first class, then vanishing behind the curtain. Now she was documenting it. Her live stream, tagged with number sign Apex Flight 237, began picking up viewers within seconds. She wasn't famous, just sharp, just angry. Her voice, soft but steady, filled the stream. "Passenger in first class just got locked up." For what? Having a valid seat? Something's wrong here. At the same time, Claire Henshaw, seated in 2C, was already editing together a highlight reel. She was a civil rights attorney, always observing, always alert. She had recorded the coffee exchange, the smug body language, the tension. She knew something bad was brewing. From Dallas, Lena pushed harder, dropping a controlled leak to a journalist at the Post. Apex Airlines locks black CEO in storage closet on his own plane after false claims. It was phrased like a question, but the video would answer it loud and clear. The news cycle ignited. Within minutes, Zariah's stream hit 10,000 views, then 20. Retweets from small creators turned into boosts from national voices. Claire posted her own clip, titled simply, "What Happens When Power Meets Bias?" In the cockpit, the captain hadn't heard a thing. Karen had bypassed protocol, never filed a formal incident report. She didn't need to. She told the crew Marcus was unstable, dangerous, aggressive, and that had been enough to tuck him away like luggage. But her silence was about to be shattered by the roar of a world watching. Back in the cramped closet, Marcus refreshed his screen, watching the viewer count climb like a rocket. Zariah's stream had just crossed 100,000. Claire's clip was trending. Hashtags like Dasha Apex Racism, Shasha Justice for Marcus, and Tashan First Class Shame started stacking across platforms. The story was no longer just his. It belonged to millions now, and they were furious. He smiled faintly, despite the sting in his back and the ache in his shoulder. They'd tried to bury him in shadows, but he just hacked the spotlight. Meanwhile, Karen lingered near the galley, arms crossed, a satisfied look creeping back onto her face. To her, Marcus was locked away, silent, neutralized. What she didn't realize was that the narrative was already out of her control. The lanky male attendant who had helped push Marcus into the closet kept glancing at the tablet in his hand. Something was off. His social feed was buzzing, notifications blaring. He tapped a link, Zariah's stream, and froze. The camera clearly caught Karen mocking Marcus, laughing, dismissing his ID. He swallowed hard. "Karen," he said quietly, "you might want to see this." Karen walked over, annoyed. One glance at the screen and the blood drained from her face. The stream played in real time, overlaid with comments flying by at blinding speed. "This is disgusting. He owns the airline. Arrest her when they land. Boycott Apex. Say his name, Marcus Reynolds." Karen backed away from the screen like it was on fire. "This means nothing," she snapped. "Social media blows over. Every time." But the crew around her wasn't convinced anymore. The damage was real. They could feel it. And in Dallas, Lena Carter watched it all unfold on a giant screen in her command room. Her team was already drafting a press statement, prepping legal options, pushing investors into emergency meetings. Marcus wasn't just back in the spotlight. He was the story now. And Karen, she was the villain, whether she knew it or not. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the world below was burning with outrage. The cabin lights dimmed as Apex Flight 237 settled into cruising altitude. Passengers tucked into their drinks, some distracted by movies, others scrolling through social media feeds that were, unbeknownst to them, exploding with the name Marcus Reynolds. The man locked in a storage closet wasn't just a headline anymore. He was a flashpoint, and Karen Holt was unraveling. In the galley, she gripped a service tray like a weapon, her mind spinning. The flight had started with her in control. She was the authority figure, the gatekeeper. But now she could feel the power slipping through her fingers, the way the crew whispered behind her back, the way that lanky attendant avoided her gaze. The fear in their eyes wasn't fear of Marcus anymore. It was fear of the truth. And the truth was going viral. She couldn't stand it, couldn't let it go. That man with his calm eyes and expensive suit had humiliated her just by existing where she didn't believe he belonged. And now the whole world was watching her fall apart in real time. Not like this. She steadied her breathing, then poured a cup of coffee, slipping a folded napkin over the lid. She added a packet of sugar, a fake smile, and a practiced walk heading toward first class. The crew said nothing. Claire Henshaw watched from 2C, phone in hand, live stream still quietly rolling. She'd seen enough courtroom breakdowns to recognize the look in Karen's eyes. Rage disguised as poise. Something was about to happen. Karen stopped at 1A. "Coffee, Mr. Reynolds?" she asked sweetly, like nothing had happened. Her voice dripped with artificial kindness, her hand perfectly steady as she extended the tray. From inside the closet, Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't even hear her. Karen's eyes flicked toward the galley. No one was watching. She took a slow, steady breath, then turned toward his seat. But Marcus wasn't in it, and that meant her plan was already unraveling faster than she thought. Karen froze mid-step. The seat at 1A was empty, neatly arranged, untouched, a folded blanket still resting on the cushion. The coffee in her hand trembled. For a split second, her carefully rehearsed plan cracked. She spun around. The lanky attendant stood awkwardly near the galley entrance, holding the closet door open. And there he was, Marcus Reynolds, walking calmly back into first class. His suit was wrinkled, his expression unreadable, but his posture radiated control. And worse for Karen, he was followed by half the cabin's attention. Zariah's phone was up again, streaming. Claire was already narrating what they were seeing. Karen's hand tightened around the coffee cup. She couldn't back down. Not now. Not in front of these cameras. Not with her job, her pride, her control unraveling by the second. "Coffee?" she offered again, stepping into his path, a little too eager. Marcus didn't flinch. He scanned her face with calm calculation, like he was cataloging every micro-expression for future litigation. "Sure," he said flatly. Karen handed him the cup, but not before her thumb accidentally pressed the lid too tight, sending the steaming liquid splashing down the front of his trousers. Marcus jolted at the burn, the heat scalding through the fabric. Gasps rang out. Zariah's stream caught the moment in high definition. "Oh no!" Karen chirped with theatrical concern, grabbing a napkin and dabbing too aggressively at the fabric. "Such a clumsy accident." But her eyes betrayed her. They weren't panicked. They were gleaming. Marcus pushed her hand away, his jaw tightening as he grabbed the cup and set it on the tray table. He sat, wincing as the heat seeped through his pants. Then, lifting the blanket from the seat, he noticed something sharp poke through the fabric. Glass. Shards, tucked beneath the blanket like a trap. He pulled his hand back, blood already blooming from a shallow slice across his palm. Karen stepped away, smirk reappearing like a mask sliding back into place. Claire stood. "That was assault," she said sharply, loud enough for the whole cabin. Karen's smile faltered, because the next chapter wouldn't be hers to narrate. It would belong to the millions now watching Marcus rise. The tension inside the first-class cabin had thickened into something almost physical, an invisible weight pressing down on every passenger. Marcus sat back in his seat, blood seeping from the shallow cut on his palm, the scalding pain in his lap still radiating through his thighs. But he didn't flinch. He just stared ahead, jaw clenched, eyes calculating. Karen had crossed the line. Again. Claire Henshaw had seen it all. Her voice rang out again, this time not through a stream, but directly to the crew. "I'm a civil rights attorney. That was a targeted assault." Some passengers gasped. Others pulled out their phones, the familiar glow of camera apps lighting up rows like warning beacons. Zariah's stream hit 500,000 viewers. Comments flew, "She burned him." "That was on purpose." "She needs to be fired, now." But Karen didn't back down. She turned, calmly returning to the galley like nothing had happened, like it was all just another in-flight inconvenience. Only the slight tremble in her hand gave her away. She didn't have time to recover. Zariah's stream picked up movement from the back of the plane. Karen again, slipping into economy, whispering into the ears of a few select passengers. A burly oil executive with a Texas drawl and whiskey breath, a grizzled trucker, a middle-aged businessman with a cheap suit and big opinions, a college kid in a hoodie and ball cap. Karen leaned in close, quiet, strategic. "He's causing trouble," she murmured. "Threatened the crew, attacked me. He's hijacking this flight." The faces hardened. Greg, the ex-cop turned crew member, appeared beside her in the aisle, arms crossed, nodding along like muscle behind the lie. "What do you want us to do?" One man grunted. Karen gave a sly, thin smile. Remind him where he belongs. She wasn't just lying anymore. She was building an army. A mob, and Marcus, still seated in 1A, injured and alert, felt the air shift before he saw them. The curtain between First and Economy rustled. Then the mob began to move. They came in a wave, 5 men fueled by entitlement and Karen's venom. Hank Grayson, the whiskey-soaked oil tycoon, led the charge with a red face and clenched fists. Behind him, the trucker, the exec, the frat kid, and Greg moved in like sharks circling blood in the water. Their footsteps thudded against the carpet, their voices a rising growl of righteous fury. "You think this is your plane?" Hank snarled as he reached Marcus's row. "You think you belong here?" Marcus didn't answer. He simply looked up, bruised, burned, bleeding, and stared Hank down like a man who had stared down worse. "Get up!" the trucker barked. Claire rose from 2C, camera still rolling, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You lay a hand on him, and every one of you is going viral. Assault, hate crime. Think about it." But they didn't. Hank shoved Marcus hard against the seat. The pain shot through his ribs, reopening the coffee burn along his thigh. Marcus grunted, not in weakness, but in strategy. He twisted Hank's wrist in a judo lock, a move learned long before he wore suits for a living, and sent the man sprawling into the aisle with a thud. The trucker lunged next, but Marcus ducked low and drove his shoulder into the man's gut, folding him like luggage. Greg moved fast, tackling Marcus from the side and slamming him into the window. The plastic trembled. Blood smeared the glass. Zariah screamed from 4A, live streaming everything. "They're attacking him," she shouted, her voice shaking. "This is real. This is happening right now." The plane erupted in chaos. Passengers rose, some filming, others shouting. The exec tried to pin Marcus from behind, but caught a knee to the groin. The frat kid hesitated, phone still up, caught between joining the brawl or filming it. And in the middle of it all, Karen watched from the galley with a sick smile. Marcus fought to his feet, battered but defiant, blood dripping from his hand. The mob had numbers, but he had the truth, and the whole world was watching now. Blood streaked across the first-class aisle. A tray table dangled from its hinges, cracked in two. The curtain separating cabins was half-ripped, hanging limp like a flag of surrender. Apex Flight 237 had become a war zone in the sky. Marcus stood in the center of it all, his suit torn, his ribs screaming, one hand slick with blood, the other balled into a fist. He wasn't sure whose blood it was anymore. Probably everyone's. Hank Grayson groaned as he tried to push himself upright, his white shirt stained red from a busted lip and the whiskey still clinging to his breath. Greg lay sprawled near the galley bulkhead, moaning and dazed. The trucker slumped against a seatback, clutching his ribs. The frat kid had fled halfway down the aisle, his live stream still going, forgotten in his hand. But Karen, she hadn't moved. She stood frozen at the galley's edge, her face pale, her eyes wide as she realized the narrative had collapsed around her. Her mob had failed. The cameras had captured every second, and now all she had left was silence, and that wouldn't save her. Claire Henshaw's voice cut through the chaos. "Captain needs to see this, now." At the same moment, the cockpit door swung open and Captain Ellis, a grizzled pilot with salt and pepper hair and a face molded by decades of turbulence, stepped out. One look at the carnage and his expression darkened. "What the hell happened here?" Passengers shouted over each other, some pointing at Karen, others at Marcus, others just trying to explain what they saw. But Ellis wasn't interested in the noise. He turned to the lanky flight attendant, who stood frozen with a tablet still showing Zariah's livestream. Ellis took it, watched 30 seconds of footage, and muttered, "God damn." He turned back toward the cockpit, already keying his mic. "This is Apex 237, he radioed in. "We're declaring an in-air disturbance, requesting immediate emergency landing in Austin. We have a high-profile passenger assaulted mid-flight, multiple injuries, and a full incident in progress." The reply came back fast. "Runway clear. Your priority one." The plane dipped slightly as the captain angled toward Austin. Passengers scrambled to their seats. Seatbelt signs blinked back on. The roar of the engines rising for descent was almost drowned out by the frantic whisper of phones pinging. News alerts, Trending hashtags, incoming calls from family watching the chaos unfold in real time. Marcus sat back down slowly, clutching his ribs. Every breath felt like broken glass. The bandage around his hand, hastily wrapped by Claire, was already soaked through with blood. But his expression never wavered. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, fire still burning in his eyes. Karen finally moved, ducking into the galley and yanking her radio from her belt. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Captain, it's not what it looks like. He faked everything. He's dangerous. But Ellis cut her off. "Save it. I saw the stream." She froze. From 4A, Zoraya's camera captured it all. The captain's glare, Karen's pale face, the defeated slump of her shoulders. Her live stream had hit 1.5 million viewers. News anchors were quoting her in real time. Marcus Reynolds wasn't just trending, he was the headline. Claire leaned across the aisle, her tone measured but unshakable. "When we land, they'll be waiting. Cops, press, legal teams. I suggest you figure out what kind of story you want to tell them." Karen didn't answer. In the back of the plane, Hank Grayson pulled himself upright, breathing heavily, blood smeared across his collar. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't need to. His phone was already in his hand, sending a single message to a contact back in Austin. "Make sure cops meet him on the tarmac. Doesn't matter what they saw. He started it." The message sent. No reply needed. Hank's money would handle the rest. As the wheels touched down and the brakes groaned beneath the jet's weight, Marcus looked out the window to see flashing red and blue lights racing alongside the plane. The world was watching, but the game was far from over. The moment Apex Flight 237's wheels screeched to a halt on the tarmac, the world shifted from chaos to full-blown pandemonium. The emergency lights flickered in the cabin as the plane taxied toward the gate, the sound of sirens growing louder with each second. Marcus, still battered from the earlier scuffle, felt a tightness in his chest. Less from the physical wounds and more from the weight of what was coming next. Through the windows, he could see the blue and red flash of cop cars lined up along the runway, their lights casting erratic shadows over the plane's fuselage. A dozen officers were already positioned near the gate. As the plane came to a stop, they didn't hesitate, rushing forward like a swarm of ants. The world outside was moving in fast forward, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that everything inside the cabin had frozen in time. He straightened up, adjusting his suit, his expression unreadable. The fight had started in the air, but it was about to spill over onto the ground. The doors of the plane opened with a sudden hiss. Marcus was immediately greeted by the flashing lights and the sharp voices of officers calling for him to exit the plane. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. He took a steadying breath, then stood and made his way toward the aisle. The plane's crew avoided his gaze, their eyes darting nervously to one another as he walked past. Karen had already been escorted off the plane by security, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. The mob of passengers she'd stirred up was now gone, replaced with an eerie silence that filled the cabin like a fog. The damage was done. Marcus knew the world had already picked its side, but what they didn't know yet was how far Hank Grayson's influence stretched. As Marcus stepped onto the jet bridge, the cold night air hit him like a slap. He knew the storm was just beginning. Marcus stepped off the jet bridge and onto the tarmac, his steps measured despite the chaos around him. The cop cars lined up like a perimeter, their sirens still wailing in the distance. A small group of officers approached him, led by a stocky, seasoned cop with a scowl carved into his face. "Mr. Reynolds, step aside," the officer barked. "We've been instructed to take you in for questioning." Marcus didn't flinch. He kept his gaze level, steady, even as cameras flashed from every angle. The world was watching him now, but it felt different this time, less like a spectacle and more like an execution waiting to happen. "Questioning?" Marcus's voice was low, but it cut through the night air with a razor-sharp edge. "I'm the one who was assaulted, not the other way around." The officer didn't respond immediately. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes flicking to Hank, who was standing with his arms crossed near the gate, his face still red from the fight. The suit-wearing tycoon didn't even have to say a word. Hank's money, his power, it all spoke for him. A moment passed, heavy with tension. The cop hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "We have a report from Grayson." he said, his voice filled with a note of finality. He says you started the altercation. Marcus felt his stomach twist, but he kept his composure. Grayson can say whatever he wants, but the cameras caught everything. I didn't lay a hand on anyone until they came after me. The officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between his orders and the weight of the truth. But the truth didn't matter here. Not in this moment. It was about who had the power to control the narrative. As Marcus was led toward a waiting police vehicle, a figure approached from the shadows. It was Lena, her expression grim but determined. She mouthed one word to him: "Trust me." In that moment, Marcus knew this wasn't over, but the fight was only just beginning, and it would be a fight on every front. The night after Marcus's arrest, the world had already decided what it thought of him. News outlets ran the story in full, with Hank Grayson's version as the headline: Apex Airlines CEO attacks flight crew, passenger assaulted, plane diverted. The article was precise, calculated, and full of gaps. It painted Marcus as the aggressor, a man who'd lost control, a man who'd assaulted employees and passengers. The real story, the video footage, the live streams, was buried, hidden beneath the weight of Hank's influence. But Lena Carter wasn't backing down. She sat in her corner office, a phone pressed to her ear, her team gathered around the conference table, eyes focused on the screens that flashed with live updates. The air in the room was thick with determination. "Push the shareholder angle," Lena barked into the phone. "We go public with Marcus's ownership stake in Apex right now. Every outlet. We force them to say his name. We force them to get the story right." Her team was already at work. A well-coordinated digital attack had already begun, sending waves of emails and social media messages to news organizations, journalists, and influencers. They would not let Hank's narrative stand. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in a cold, sterile room in the local holding facility. His body ached from the earlier fight, bruises still fresh, his hand wrapped but still bleeding. He wasn't worried about his freedom. He wasn't worried about the immediate fight ahead. He was thinking bigger. He knew how the system worked, and he knew that his next move had to be precise. The media storm that was brewing wasn't just going to be about his innocence. It was going to be about dismantling the corruption around him. The video footage from Zariah's stream, Claire's legal commentary, and the live streams had already started a fire. What they didn't know was that Lena had plans to fuel it with a revelation. Apex was his. The truth was about to come to light. The hours stretched on in the holding cell, and Marcus barely noticed the time passing. His mind raced, plotting out every move. He knew that Hank Grayson's attempt to bury him with lies was only the beginning. The real fight was just starting, and it was going to be fought in the courtrooms and on the screens of millions of people watching from their homes. Lena had already started mobilizing her legal team. They were compiling every piece of evidence, every video, every eyewitness account. The lies Hank had fed to the cops wouldn't hold up in court, not with all the footage that proved Marcus's side of the story. What Hank didn't realize was that Lena had already secured the legal framework to take him down. She'd been digging for months, building a case around the unethical practices inside Apex Airlines, and now it was all coming together. The sound of a door unlocking interrupted his thoughts. Marcus looked up to see a tall officer standing in the doorway, keys in hand. "You're free to go," the officer said flatly. Marcus stood, his movements slow but purposeful. "I'll be in touch," he said, giving the officer a nod before stepping out into the chaos of the media frenzy waiting just outside the building. The second he stepped into the sunlight, the questions came. Cameras flashed from all directions. Reporters shoved microphones in his face. But Marcus held his ground, looking calm and unshaken. His voice was steady, even as he was bombarded with accusations and demands for answers. "Mr. Reynolds," a reporter called out, "what's your response to the allegations? Do you regret the violence?" Marcus took a breath. "I regret nothing. What I regret is that the truth has been buried for so long. But that's about to change. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's been pushed down, silenced by people like Hank Grayson." The words landed like a bombshell, and in the background, Lena was already on the phone, getting the legal team ready for the next battle. As the press conference continued, Marcus knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just the fight for his freedom, It was the beginning of his battle for control. The following weeks blurred into a whirlwind of legal battles, media storms, and public scrutiny. Marcus Reynolds wasn't just fighting for his freedom anymore. He was fighting to reclaim his narrative, his company, and every ounce of dignity they tried to strip from him. Every court hearing, every interview, every tweet, it was all part of a larger war that was no longer just about a single altercation on an airplane. Lena was relentless. She had taken over the PR campaign, forcing the media to acknowledge Marcus's role as the rightful owner of Apex Airlines. They were hitting back hard, new statements, new interviews, and an ever-growing list of public figures calling for an investigation into Hank Grayson's ties to the airline. The footage from Zariah's live stream and Claire's legal commentary continued to circulate, painting the image of a man who had been wronged by a system that prioritized power over justice. But in the shadows, Hank was still pulling strings. His influence ran deeper than anyone had realized. The courts were slow to react. The media was already shifting, with some outlets questioning Marcus's narrative and echoing Hank's claims of him being unstable or dangerous. Even though the truth was out there, it wasn't enough. Hank's wealth, his connections, and his sheer force of will had kept the scales from tipping in Marcus's favor. One particular afternoon, Marcus sat in his office, his fingers tapping against the polished wood of the desk. His mind was sharp, calculating, planning his next move. He knew Hank would try to take him down, but he wasn't prepared for how far Grayson was willing to go. The legal team was already preparing for a full-scale court battle, but Marcus knew that this fight wasn't just going to be won in courtrooms, it was going to take something bigger. It was time to turn the tables. In the distance, the sound of a notification pinged across his phone. It was from Lena. "We've got a leak. A big one." Marcus's heart skipped a beat as he opened the message from Lena. The stakes had just escalated, and he knew this was the turning point they'd been waiting for. He quickly tapped a reply. "What do we have?" The response was immediate. "Hank Grayson's financials. We've got proof of him siphoning money through offshore accounts. There's a trail linking him directly to the corrupt practices at Apex." Marcus leaned back in his chair, the weight of the information sinking in. This was the kind of ammunition they needed, the kind that would shatter Hank's carefully crafted empire. If they could tie him directly to financial misconduct, not just bias or assault, it would change everything. It wouldn't just be a battle for the truth, it would be an attack on Hank's entire network of power. The hours that followed were a blur. Marcus and Lena's team pored over the financial documents, piecing together the damning evidence. Every transaction, every offshore account, everything pointed back to Hank Grayson, using Apex resources to fuel his own wealth, all while silencing whistleblowers, including the ones who had tried to expose him before. But Marcus knew that a leak of this magnitude wasn't enough. They needed to go public, to push this into the light. They would have to launch a counterattack that left no room for Hank to escape. He couldn't rely on just the media or the courts. This would need to be everywhere, on social media, in news outlets, across every platform, a full-blown campaign. As Lena and her team worked tirelessly to release the information, Marcus prepared for the next step. He wasn't just going to sit back and wait for the system to change. He was going to force it to. Outside, the storm was brewing. The legal fight was about to reach its breaking point. In the next chapter, Marcus would make his final move to take down the man who thought he could buy his way out of anything. The moment Marcus hit send, he knew there was no going back. The files, the evidence, everything Hank had carefully hidden for years was now out in the open. The financial documents, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, it was all over the media within minutes. The world had been watching for months. The assault on the plane, the twisted narrative Hank tried to sell, the courtroom battles. But this was different. This was the moment that would bring Hank to his knees. Lena's team had worked around the clock, feeding the information to trusted journalists and influencers, amplifying every angle. News outlets scrambled to confirm the leaks, some even turning to Marcus for comment. This wasn't just about a fight between two men anymore. It was a battle for the soul of Apex Airlines, and Marcus was determined to win. As the media storm exploded, Marcus couldn't afford to relax. The weight of the fight was still heavy on his shoulders, but now it was more than just legal maneuvering. It was about ensuring Hank had no place to hide. Marcus knew Hank wouldn't go down without a fight. The man was a master manipulator, and Marcus could feel the pushback coming. He could already hear Hank's lawyers circling, preparing their counterattack. But Marcus wasn't going to let Hank control the narrative anymore. He had been patient, playing the long game, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment had arrived. Sitting in his office, Marcus glanced at the phone in front of him. The screen lit up with dozens of alerts, but one in particular caught his attention. It was from Claire Henshaw, the civil rights attorney who had been following his case from the start. The message was simple. They're making their move. Hank's pulling every string. Be ready. Marcus exhaled, his grip tightening on the phone. The final phase of the battle had begun. The calm before the storm never lasted long, and Marcus could feel the tension mounting. His phone buzzed again. It was a news alert. Hank Grayson had issued a public statement denying everything. He had called the leaks fabricated and suggested that Marcus was manipulating the press. It was a classic tactic, a way to undermine the growing pressure. But Marcus was ready. He knew Hank's playbook. The public statement was just a distraction, a smokescreen to buy time and protect his empire. But the truth was out there now. The more Hank shouted, the more people would listen to the evidence. Marcus had learned long ago how to turn the tables. Lena was already preparing their next move. They're going to hit us with a countersuit, she told him over the phone. Hank has deep pockets, and his legal team is ruthless. But we have the upper hand now. We'll be ready. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation pressing on him. This was bigger than just him, bigger than just Apex. It was about the people who had been oppressed, ignored, and silenced by those who thought their money and power could protect them. And Marcus was determined to make sure that the world knew what Hank Grayson had been hiding for years. It wasn't just the financial crimes, it was the way Hank had used his power to manipulate, control, and destroy anyone who stood in his way. It was time to end that. Claire's voice echoed in his mind, her warning still fresh. They're making their move. Be ready. The next day, Marcus was standing at a press conference, cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. He took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the crowd. He had one chance to set the record straight. Let's make one thing clear, he began, his voice steady and calm. The truth is out, and Hank Grayson is running out of time. The room went silent, and Marcus felt the weight of that silence shift. The battle for Apex had reached its final stages. The courtroom was packed, and the weight of the moment hung thick in the air. The sound of murmurs echoed through the room as Marcus stood with his legal team, his eyes focused ahead. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was the culmination of months of struggle, betrayal, and relentless pursuit of justice. And now it all came down to this. Hank Grayson, sitting across from him, appeared composed on the surface. But Marcus could see the anger simmering beneath the carefully controlled facade. Grayson's empire of lies, manipulation, and corruption had finally caught up with him. The financial documents, the offshore accounts, the hidden assets, all had been laid bare in front of the world. There was no way out for him now. The judge, a seasoned and impartial figure, looked up from his papers. His voice was steady as he addressed the room. The evidence presented here is irrefutable. The financial misconduct and abuse of power by Mr. Grayson are clear. Mr. Marcus Reynolds, the majority shareholder of Apex Airlines, has not only proven his innocence, but has shown the perseverance and courage to expose a system of corruption that has been in place for far too long. Marcus held his breath as the judge continued. In light of the evidence, I hereby rule in favor of Mr. Reynolds. Mr. Grayson will be stripped of his ownership in Apex Airlines, and the necessary legal actions will be taken against him for his crimes. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't just a victory for him. It was a victory for everyone who had been crushed under the weight of Hank's influence. It was a victory for truth and justice. As the room began to stir, Marcus stood tall, the weight of his victory settling over him. He had fought for so long, and now, at last, he had won. Apex was his again. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the gavel came down. Marcus felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He had done it. Apex Airlines was finally his again. The years of struggle, of fighting against Hank's empire of lies, the media smear campaigns, the courtroom battles, it had all led to this one moment, and it was over. Hank Grayson was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his face twisted with disbelief. The mighty tycoon, once untouchable, had been reduced to nothing. His empire was crumbling, and Marcus was the one who had brought it down. But for Marcus, this wasn't just about winning Apex back. It was about something bigger. The truth had been revealed, and Hank's corruption was exposed for the world to see. Marcus had fought not just for himself, but for the countless people who had suffered under Grayson's tyranny, the customers, the employees, the people who had been silenced for far too long. This was their victory as much as it was his. As Marcus walked out of the courtroom, the press were waiting. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. But he didn't need to say much. The victory spoke for itself. The truth was clear. Hank Grayson's reign of corruption had ended, and Marcus was ready to take Apex Airlines into a new era of transparency and fairness. In the days that followed, Marcus took control of Apex with a steady hand. He immediately began to make changes, from rebuilding trust with the employees to revamping the company's practices. Every decision he made was a step toward creating the company he had always dreamed of, a company built on honesty, integrity, and respect for everyone involved. The battle had been hard, but it was worth it. As Marcus stood at the helm of Apex Airlines once more, he knew that this victory wasn't just a personal triumph. It was a new beginning, for him, for the company, and for everyone who had fought beside him. The future of Apex Airlines was finally in the right hands.